My first trip to Africa was to Dakar, Senegal. And I was 20 years old, maybe 19 or 20. I went as part of an exchange program through Sister Cities International. And so I went by myself. I was actually the only person from DC who went to Dakar. And I was received very warmly. I lived with families, and I was supposed to have a job. It never really materialized. I was just kind of sitting there. But I had a wonderful experience. I'll tell you that the one thing I remember vividly is when I was riding from the airport to the home where I was staying, I saw people walking with carrying things on their heads. Bags, bundles, buckets, everything on their heads. And I had thought that that was a negative stereotype.
Hello guys, my name is Golden Boy and I'm really grateful that you clicked on this video. So today I've partnered with
Raphael Nantika.
Yeah, Raphael Nantika. So we want to talk about this woman who moved to Africa for the first time, second time, and she had her own experience. So one of the best things that she's trying to say that is that many Africans have disconnected from the African Americans, and African Americans think that Africans still have that connections with them. I don't want to waste your time and data. I want you to watch this video for yourself. Then we'll catch up at the end of the video.
I thought when we saw those images, it was a degrading, that they were making that up to show us in a negative light, when in fact, that's the reality. That's how people move around. That's how they move their things. We carry them on our shoulders and on our backs. They carry them on their heads, and they stand very tall and regal, and it's beautiful. So I felt great. The other caveat to that, though, is that I spent a lot of time with college students that I had met when I was in school in France prior. So I felt accepted because these were my friends that I had made before. The next time I traveled to the continent was 25 years, 30 years later, something like, no, 30 years, 25 years later. And that was an equally as enlightening experience. This time I went with 50 Black folks who we had traced to the country of Cameroon for their ancestry. We all went to Cameroon. And that felt like the whole country was just one big welcome wagon. I mean, they were very excited for us to be there. They followed us in the media. So whenever the next place we were going, they knew we were coming. And everybody was gracious, and they just kept saying, "You're welcome, you're welcome, you're welcome." So of course, there are going to be some Africans that have a negative perspective of African Americans, just like there are plenty of African Americans who have a negative perspective of Africa. And I'll tell you, that's just part of the master plan. Just like we're fed negative images of them, they're fed negative images of us. There's so much power that's possible in our reconnecting that the people in power, the colonial powers, the colonizers, the white supremacists, whatever you want to call them, it's in their best interest for us to stay divided. And so as a result, they're going to stoke those flames of ignorance and lack of understanding between us. So when people say, well, Africans don't like us, I say that's hogwash. I visited slave dungeons in 3 different countries, or areas that had slave dungeons in 3 different countries. I went to Gorée Island, like your cousin did, in Senegal. I went to Cape Coast Castle Dungeon in Ghana, and I visited Bimbia in Cameroon. I don't remember when I was a teenager. I don't remember the attitudes of the people around. I can't speak on that. When I went to Cameroon, we actually met with the local community. And they had what was almost like a reconciliation ceremony. They were never taught about what happened. So, of course they're going to be disconnected because they've never been taught. Just like there's so many things we aren't taught about who we are and our ancestors. And so once they were educated, they had this ceremony to apologize to us as the returning sons and daughters. And it was important for them to apologize to us for us and for them, if that makes any sense. And then when I visited the Cape Coast Castle Dungeon in Ghana, I visited with a lot of people. And there was only one or two Ghanaians with us. And so the feeling that I got from that experience was much more of the African American reaction to being in that space rather than the Ghanaian reaction. But I think it all just boils down to ignorance. They just didn't know. They just haven't been taught.
So, I just wanted to dispel those myths. I feel like they're kind of myths, you know.
You're right. I agree. It's definitely a myth that, and you know what else? You didn't ask me this question, but one of the things that I think is becoming talked about more often is the idea that, and the reality that there were Africans that sold other Africans. And I feel like that's true. That's historical fact. But the context is often missing. So people tend to use that as an excuse almost for what we were talking about earlier in terms of Africans not liking African Americans and vice versa. The reality is they didn't know what they were selling their rivals into. It wasn't like they knew that they were going to go and they were never going to come back. And because there's been slavery all around the world forever.
One of the things that I want you to learn about is that in Africa, there was something that is called servanthood, and it is not slavery. And that servanthood meant that if you found yourself improvised for some reason, you'll work for another fellow African for an agreed period of time with agreed compensations. So, and these agreed skills and were being transferred in order for you to build your wealth for yourself after selling your services and doing your time as a servant. So, servant is in line with our African spiritual principles, and that slavery is in Europeans and is something that was evil concept. So, in Africa, we had something that is called servanthood, and in Europe we had something called slavery. So this is something that is very spiritual, and it is a spiritual principle that up to now even some still practice it. So I want to give you like an example of Sipho Maduna from the part of our land that we call South Africa, that they were calling it at KwaZulu, the land of people of heaven, or others were also calling it the Lesotho, which was the land of dark brown skinned people like us. So KwaZulu and Lesotho actually meant that Africa, but they had reduced themselves into KwaZulu, so to a province in South Africa, and they have reduced that to a Lesotho, which was also a country, a small country within South Africa. So this is something that it is one people for one another. When we move again, we want to move to Nigeria and Cameroon. So these are also which was formed all by Europeans for their designs. What you call them as today, they were actually smaller nations of kingdom that lived mostly independently, and some were quite large, like Benin area, which was also part of today's, which is Nigeria, and Doualo in Cameroon. So Africans were trading in the Middle Eastern across the Sahara Desert, and Africans had a stamina throughout the prevalence stretches stretch of the desert. So the Middle Easterns had been fighting to push back on European inclusions into the European sought a sea route to India for trade. So it was actually a bloody mess as many Europeans were being killed. So this is where we call the Cherokee lands, which was the Americans. That is a scam. So it was accidentally visited, which up to now it is not even found. It was not discovered because the people stopped saying about it. So by Columbus and later on Amerigon, all Italian sailors commissioned by the Spanish kingdom. This was after some Western people had to the Cherokee land and back. So the Europeans were looking for a sea route to India. You have to remember that. Then they were seeking gold and diamond. So when Europeans came to today's America, some Middle Easterns who had forged some relationship with the Portuguese started the idea of slavery. So it is up to this point that the Europeans came peacefully with gifts and religion and asked for trade relationships. So they usually form a blood pact with the kings, then they ambush the people when they get comfortable with deadly weapons. This is something it's happening up to date, and you'll find that even up to date, you'll find that these Europeans are trying to approach our presidents, are trying to approach the current governments in most of the parts of Africa for the benefits, or they have something that will at least try to attack the nation. So this is something that I had for you, and Raphael is going to talk about other things, which I think that is very nice if you listen to Raphael. But before that, I want to tell you that now many Africans have disconnected from the Black Americans. They don't remember anything that was done many years ago. They don't remember anything that was done 3 years, 5 years, other centuries. We don't actually remember. That's why we are saying that we don't hate Africans. Actually, we see you as our visitors. We see you as people who have currently discovered themselves and they wish to come to Africa in order to find the ancestors. So Raphael, do you have anything to say?
Yes, what I can say, like in Africa, during those times, women, even men were taken to the victors' community, and the women were forced to marry and bore children for the victors' community, and also act as laborers, provided labor to the community.
So Raphael, do you think that right now Africans have a connection to the African Americans?
Not really, because I strongly think that there wanna be some Africans who have a negative perspective on African Americans. If you know Africa very well, we will say it is the opposite of that. What will happen to African American? African Americans are very welcomed in Africa, and because they have a lot of assets in Africa. We have a lot of assets such as tourists. There's a lot of things to enjoy about Africa. So when you observe carefully and beyond mere tourist connection, you think there's a role you can play in Africa. Okay, I have had an opportunity to live some people. I have an experience from other people who have lived in countries like Netherlands, Ireland, UK, such countries. Because most of these Africans there are the most well organized. Most of those African American in those countries are the most well organized and well equipped among the blacks everywhere else. You should be aware of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's all we had about this video, and it is up to this point, it is up to you that you know that we don't have hatred against the black community. We don't have hatred against the African community. And to that point that we conclude by saying that you are welcome to Africa, you are welcome to any part of the African countries.
Yeah, there's
and
a lot of to enjoy in Africa.
Yeah, don't
from
feel
the tourist sector,
yeah,
everything, a lot of resources.
Yeah. So don't feel a negative stereotype that we hate you when we see you as a different person. Actually, we are seeing you as one of our members, but you are trying to discover yourself. So up to this point, do you have anything to ask, Raphael?
No, I really don't. What I would ask to our loyal subscribers is just continue subscribing and be ready for more content.
Yes. Bye and see you in the next video.